The Byzantine solidus lasted 700 years, 7 centuries of monetary stability while empires rose and fell around it. Merchants from Ireland to China accepted it without question. Then, in less than a single generation, it became worthless. The people holding it didn't see it coming. They couldn't see it coming because every warning sign looked like something else. Economic stress, bad harvests, foreign competition. They blamed everything except the one thing that was actually killing them. That's the trap. Currency collapse doesn't announce itself. It disguises itself as other problems until the final stage, when suddenly everyone understands at once, and by then, your savings are already gone. I've spent months studying the death of 6 different currencies across 2,000 years of history. Not the sanitized textbook version, the actual sequence of events, the specific decisions, the exact moment when decline became irreversible. And I found something that should terrify anyone. Paying attention. Every single collapse followed the same 5 warning signs in the same order. Not similar, identical, and the United States has now triggered 4 of the 5. Let's start with the currency that proves how fast the final stage hits. Germany, 1914. The mark was one of the strongest currencies in the world. The German economy was an industrial powerhouse. Mercedes, Krupp Steel, BASF Chemicals. They were building products the whole world wanted to buy. The mark was backed by gold. Savings accounts actually grew in purchasing power. A German worker in 1914 could save for 10 years and buy more with those savings than when he deposited them. Then came the war. The Kaiser's government faced a choice that every empire eventually faces. They could fund the war through taxes, which would be painful and unpopular. They could fund it through honest borrowing, which would require admitting the war might last years. Or they could print money and figure out the consequences later. They chose the printing press. Between 1914 and 1918, the money supply quadrupled. But here's what's critical to understand. Inflation didn't explode during the war. Prices rose, but gradually. The government imposed controls. People accepted shortages as patriotic sacrifice. The currency looked damaged but functional. The war ended in 1918. Germany lost. And this is where the real lesson begins. For 3 years after the war, from 1918 to 1921, the mark continued declining but remained usable. Prices roughly doubled. Unpleasant, but manageable. Germans grumbled about costs, but went about their lives. Foreign observers noted the inflation, but didn't predict catastrophe. The frog was boiling, but the water still felt like a warm bath. Then came 1922. In January 1922, $1 bought 190 marks. By July, it bought 670 marks. By December, it bought 7,400 marks. The acceleration wasn't linear. It was exponential. Each month was worse than the last by a larger margin than the month before. People who thought they understood the trajectory were wrong by orders of magnitude. But even in late 1922, with the mark losing value daily, most Germans didn't panic. They had adapted. They spent money faster. They asked for raises. They assumed the government would stabilize things eventually. They had lived with inflation for 8 years. This was just more of the same. Worse, but the same category of problem. They were catastrophically wrong. In January 1923, $1 bought 17,000 marks. By July, 350,000 marks. By September, 100 million marks. By November, 4.2 trillion marks. The entire collapse, from bad but manageable to your life savings won't buy a loaf of bread, took 11 months. 11 months. A German who retired in January 1923 with enough savings to live comfortably for 20 years was destitute by Christmas. A factory worker who received his paycheck on Friday would find it worth half as much by Monday. People burned currency for heat because it was cheaper than buying firewood. A wheelbarrow of cash couldn't buy a wheelbarrow of potatoes. The middle class was annihilated. Not gradually, not over decades. In less than a year, every German who had saved money, followed the rules, trusted the system, was wiped out. Every pension, every insurance policy, every bank account, every bond, all of it, gone. The people who survived were those who owned real things. Factories, farmland, gold hidden from the authorities. Foreign currency obtained illegally. Everyone who trusted the mark was destroyed. Here's the part that should keep you awake tonight. During the slow period from 1918 to 1921, the warning signs were visible. The money supply was expanding faster than the economy. Government debt was growing beyond any possibility of repayment through taxation. Trade deficits were draining gold reserves. Political leadership was making short-term decisions to avoid short-term pain. Every single one of these warning signs is flashing in the United States right now. I need you to understand why I'm showing you this history. In Germany, the people who saved their families were the ones who acted while the water was still warm. The ones who waited until the crisis was obvious waited too long. By the time everyone agreed the mark was collapsing, there was nothing left to save. If this pattern is clicking into place for you, if you're starting to see the sequence, I need you to hit the like button right now. Not for me. Because every pushes this in front of someone who still thinks they have time to wait and see. They don't. The waiting period is the trap. Now let me show you the warning sign that tells you when the final stage is about to begin. The Byzantine Empire understood monetary discipline better than any civilization in history. For over 700 years, from 309 AD to the 1030 S, the Byzantine solidus maintained its gold content at 4.5 grams of pure gold. Let me put that in perspective. The solidus outlasted the Roman denarius. It outlasted the Persian daric. It outlasted every currency that existed when it was created, and most currencies that would be created for centuries after. Arab merchants called it the dollar of the Middle Ages. Chinese traders accepted it without weighing it. The solidus was the most trusted currency in human history. What killed it wasn't invasion. It wasn't plague. It wasn't natural disaster. It was a policy decision. Emperor Constantine IX faced a budget crisis in the 1040s. The military was expensive. The bureaucracy was bloated. Revenue wasn't covering costs. He had two options: reform the spending or debase the currency just slightly to stretch the budget. He chose debasement. He reduced the gold content from 24 carats to 21 carats. Just a 12% reduction, barely noticeable. The coins looked the same, they spent the same. The economy didn't collapse. Problem solved. Except now, the precedent existed. His successors faced their own budget crises. Each one reached for the same solution. By 1070, the solidus was down to 15 carats. By 1080, just 8 carats. A currency that had maintained its integrity for 7 centuries lost 2/3 of its gold content in 40 years. The final collapse into near worthlessness took another 50 years. Here's the warning sign the Byzantines missed. Once debasement begins, it never reverses under the same system. Never. In 2,000 years of monetary history, I cannot find a single example of a government that debased its currency and then voluntarily restored it to previous standards. Not one. The pressure is always toward more debasement because the short-term benefits are immediate and the long-term costs fall on future politicians. The United States began its debasement in 1933 when Roosevelt confiscated gold and revalued it. It accelerated in 1965 when they removed silver from coins. It became terminal in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window. That's 90 years of continuous debasement without a single reversal. The pattern says there won't be a reversal. The pattern says there can't be a reversal within this system. Let's go to France for the warning sign about who gets destroyed. In 1789, the French Revolution faced an immediate problem. The new government had inherited the old monarchy's debts but had destroyed the tax system that serviced them. They needed money fast. The solution was the assignat, a paper currency backed by confiscated church lands. The assignats were supposed to be temporary. They were supposed to be limited in quantity. They were supposed to be retired as the lands were sold. Every single promise was broken within 2 years. The money supply exploded. Between 1790 and 1796, the French government printed 45 billion livres worth of assignats. Prices rose accordingly. A measure of flour that cost 2 livres in 1790 cost 225 livres by 1795. But here's what matters. The inflation didn't hit everyone equally. If you were a peasant farmer, you actually did. Okay, you had food. You could barter. You didn't depend on savings or wages denominated in paper. If you were a factory owner with hard assets and pricing power, you raised prices and survived. If you were politically connected and received the new money first, you could buy assets before prices rose. But if you were middle class, if you were a shopkeeper, a clerk, a teacher, a professional who had spent years building modest savings and lived on fixed contracts and trusted the currency, you were annihilated. The assignat inflation specifically targeted the bourgeoisie. It transferred wealth from the prudent to the connected, from savers to debtors, from those who played by the rules to those who understood the game was rigged. A French merchant who held assignats while his competitor held gold lost everything. A landlord with fixed leases watched his real income collapse. A worker who negotiated a salary in January found it worthless by December. The middle class didn't just get poorer, it got liquidated. The French Revolution is famous for executing aristocrats. It should be famous for financially executing the bourgeoisie with a printing press. This is the part they don't teach you. Inflation isn't a general economic condition. It's a wealth transfer mechanism with specific winners and specific losers. The winners are always those closest to the money creation. The losers are always those furthest from it. In revolutionary France, the winners were politicians and speculators. The losers were shopkeepers and savers. In America today, the winners are Wall Street, government contractors, and asset owners. The losers are workers, savers, and anyone who trusts a dollar to hold its value. The pattern holds across every example. Weimar Germany liquidated its middle class into the hands of industrialists and foreign speculators. Byzantine debasement transferred wealth from merchants to the military aristocracy. Every currency collapse is a revolution by other means, a redistribution that couldn't happen through politics happening instead through monetary policy. The people being robbed never vote for it. Most of them never even understand it until after. If you're starting to realize which side of this transfer you're on, subscribe to this channel right now. Not because I need subscribers, because the videos we're releasing over the next month are going to show you specifically how to move from the losing side to the surviving side before the next acceleration. The German middle class didn't have YouTube channels warning them in 1922. You do, but only if you're paying attention. Let's talk about the final warning sign, the one that tells you the last stage is imminent. Zimbabwe, 2008. Argentina, 2001. Venezuela, 2018. Lebanon, 2020. These aren't ancient history. These are modern economies with modern financial systems that collapse within our lifetimes. Each one followed the same sequence, and each one displayed the same final warning sign before the rapid phase began. The warning sign is this: when the government starts attacking the measurement of inflation, rather than inflation itself, you are months from acceleration. In Zimbabwe, the government stopped publishing inflation statistics entirely in 2008, when they exceeded 200 million%. In Argentina, the Kirchner government fired statisticians who reported accurate inflation numbers and replaced them with loyalists who produced fake data. In Venezuela, they simply made inflation reporting illegal. The United States hasn't reached this stage overtly, but consider what has happened to inflation measurement over the past 40 years. The methodology has been revised repeatedly, always in directions that produce lower official numbers. Hedonic adjustments, substitution effects, geometric weighting, housing calculations that wildly understate actual housing costs. If the Bureau of Labor Statistics used the same methodology today that it used in 1980, official inflation would be running 3 to 4 times higher than reported. They haven't stopped publishing the number. They've just changed what the number means. The effect is the same. The thermometer is broken on purpose so you don't realize you're boiling. Here's the sequence. Watch for it. First, the government runs deficits that can't be closed through taxation or legitimate borrowing. In 1960, the U.S. national debt was $286 billion. It took 200 years to accumulate that much. By 2000, it was $5.6 trillion. By 2010, $13.5 trillion. By 2020, $27 trillion. Today, over $36 trillion. The debt is now growing by $1 trillion every 100 days. Not every year. Every 100 days. The interest payments alone exceed $1.1 trillion annually, more than the entire defense budget, more than Medicare. The deficit cannot be closed by taxation because the tax base isn't large enough. If you confiscated 100% of the income of every American earning over $500,000, you still couldn't balance the budget. The math is broken beyond repair. This stage began decades ago and has accelerated beyond any historical precedent. Second, the central bank begins financing government deficits directly or indirectly through the banking system. Before 2008, the Federal Reserve's balance sheet was around $800 billion, accumulated over 95 years of existence. By 2014, it was $4.5 trillion. By 2022, nearly $9 trillion. The Fed didn't earn that money. They created it. They used it to buy treasury bonds that the market wouldn't absorb at interest rates the government could afford. This is monetization. This is the printing press with extra steps. When the Fed buys government debt with newly created dollars, they are funding government spending with inflation. Every dollar they create dilutes every dollar you hold. This stage went vertical in 2008 and became permanent policy. Third, inflation begins rising but is explained away as temporary, transitory, caused by external factors. Remember 2021? Inflation hit levels not seen in 40 years. The Federal Reserve called it transitory. Supply chain issues, pent-up demand, COVID disruptions, temporary factors that would resolve themselves. For 18 months, they insisted the inflation was not their fault. It wasn't the trillions they printed. It wasn't the deficits they monetized. It was ships stuck in ports. It was workers who didn't want to work. It was anything except the one thing they controlled. This is the denial stage. This is the moment when the government begins managing perception instead of managing policy. Every hyperinflation in history includes a period where officials insist the currency is sound while the printing presses run overtime. Fourth, interest rates rise but remain below the real inflation rate, creating negative returns for savers. This is happening right now. Your savings account might pay 4 or 5%. The official inflation rate is around 3%. That sounds like a real return. It isn't. Official inflation is measured using a methodology designed to produce low numbers. Housing costs are calculated using a fictional concept called owner's equivalent rent that wildly understates actual housing inflation. If your rent increased 30%, the government formula might record it as 5%. Medical costs, education costs, insurance costs, the things that actually consume middle-class budgets, are systematically understated. Real inflation, the kind you experience at the grocery store and the gas pump, is running 7 to 10% by independent calculations. Your 5% savings return is a 2 to 5% annual loss in purchasing power. You're not saving. You're donating to the system. This is financial repression, and it's the policy tool of choice for governments that can't pay their debts honestly. Fifth, the government begins attacking the measurement system or implementing controls. We're seeing the early stages. The Bureau of Labor Statistics has revised inflation methodology over 20 times since 1980, and every revision produced lower numbers. What a coincidence. There's increasing pressure on alternative data sources. Social media platforms flag misinformation about economic conditions. Proposals for price controls surface whenever inflation spikes, as they did in 2022. Price controls are the final desperation move before the terminal stage. Rome tried them under Diocletian. France tried them during the Revolution. Nixon tried them in 1971. They have never worked. They have always preceded acceleration. When you see serious proposals for price controls in the United States, know that the people in charge have run out of ideas and are reaching for the same failed solution every dying currency has tried. Sixth, the acceleration, the part that takes 11 months and wipes out everyone who waited too long to act. We're not in stage 6 yet, but the distance between stage 5 and stage 6 is shorter than people think. In Weimar Germany, the slow inflation lasted from 1918 to 1922, 4 years of manageable decline, then 11 months of annihilation. In Zimbabwe, the slow period lasted from 2000 to 2006, 6 years of bad but survivable inflation, then 2 years of catastrophe that ended with $100 trillion bills that couldn't buy a bus ticket. The pattern shows a long runway of deterioration followed by a short cliff of collapse. The runway is when you prepare. The cliff is when you discover whether you prepared enough. The United States is somewhere between stage 4 and stage 5. The exact timing is unknowable. Weimar's slow period lasted 4 years before the 11-month collapse. The solidus debasement took 40 years before the terminal decline. Argentina cycled through collapses repeatedly over decades. The pattern is certain. The timing is not. But here's what the pattern tells us about timing. By the time the final stage is obvious, you've already lost. The Germans who protected themselves did it in 1921, when things were bad but still functional. The ones who waited until 1923, when the trajectory was undeniable, had nothing left to protect. The question isn't whether America's currency will follow the same path. The warning signs say it already is. The question is whether you'll position yourself like the German industrialists who converted to hard assets early, or like the German pensioners who trusted the mark until it couldn't buy bread. The currency dies the same way every time because the incentives are the same every time. Governments can always print, citizens can always be deceived, the mathematics always win eventually. The only variable is who understands the pattern and who becomes its victim. Drop a comment below and tell me which warning sign you think we're closest to. Are we stage 4, stage 5, already in the early phase of 6? Because I'm reading these comments. I'm seeing which patterns people recognize. And the next video is going to be built around what you're seeing on the ground that doesn't show up in official statistics. The Byzantine solidus lasted 700 years. The mark lasted 43 years before collapsing into worthlessness. The assignat lasted 6 years. The dollar has been unbacked for 54 years. And every metric of monetary health is worse than when the previous collapses began. 7 centuries of stability can end in a single generation. 6 years of revolution can liquidate a middle class. 11 months can turn retirement savings into kindling. The pattern doesn't care about American exceptionalism. It doesn't respect military power or GDP or reserve currency status. It cares about one thing, whether claims on wealth exceed actual wealth. When they do, for long enough, the adjustment comes. The pattern is waiting. It's infinitely patient, and it always collects. The Romans who saw the denarius losing silver content had a choice. They could trust the emperor's assurances that the currency was sound, or they could trade their coins for land, for goods, for anything real. The ones who trusted were impoverished. The ones who acted preserved wealth across generations. The Germans who saw the mark wobbling in 1921 had a choice. They could believe the government's promises of stabilization, or they could convert their savings into foreign currency, into gold, into factories and farmland. The ones who believed lost everything in 11 months. The ones who acted built dynasties that still exist today. The French bourgeoisie who watched the assignat printing presses had a choice. They could assume the revolution would find its footing, that the currency would stabilize, that normalcy would return. Or they could recognize that they were watching a wealth transfer in real time and position themselves on the receiving end instead of the losing end. You have the same choice. The mathematics are the same, the political incentives are the same, the historical pattern is the same. The only variable is whether you recognize the sequence while there's still time to act on it, or whether you recognize it in hindsight while explaining to your children why their inheritance evaporated. Every empire believes it's different. Every empire is wrong. The only question is whether you'll learn from the ones that came before, or become another lesson for the ones that come after.